Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of AI, specifically the need for regulation. And guys, I gotta say, looking at this stuff, it's moving so fast. It feels like we only have like 18 months to get this right.
18 months, wow.
I know, crazy, right? I mean, we all see those headlines about AI writing code, even starting to understand science. But the sources for this deep dive, I mean, they really lay out how fast it's all accelerating and why that has some experts seriously worried.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, just a year ago, we were looking at like a 2, maybe 3-year window to really get ahead of some of these big risks with AI. But all this progress just in the past 12 months has shrunk that timeline down big time.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, things are moving. So let's get into it, like really specific. You know, one of the sources, it highlights how AI models are getting so good at coding. It's kind of freaky, actually.
It's true.
There's this benchmark called SWE Bench, and it tests how well AI can solve real-world coding problems. And get this, a year ago, the top models could only solve like 2% of them. Now they're solving almost 50%.
Yeah, and it's not even just the percentage increase, right? What's really striking is the types of problems they can solve. That complexity is growing fast. This isn't just writing simple scripts anymore. We're talking AI that can write code that can be used in real-world applications.
Yeah.
Huge potential benefits.
Huge.
But, also some big risks.
Exactly, because if AI can write code, it can also write code that's malicious. And the source actually talks about this team, the Frontier Red team at Anthropic, and they're doing this work looking at how AI could be used in cyber attacks. It's wild. They're finding that even the models we have now could be used to assist with some pretty serious offensive cyber operations.
Yeah, and as these models get even more sophisticated, capable of more complex planning, those risks, well, they're only going to increase. Imagine an AI that can not only exploit vulnerabilities, but also plan and execute a multi-stage cyber attack.
Yeah.
We got to be ready for that.
That is a scenario, Kat. Not good. Okay, so we've got AI learning to code, like at this insane rate, and that has major implications for cybersecurity. But it's not just coding, right?
Right.
The source also goes into how AI is getting better at understanding science, specifically biology and chemistry. Now, that's where things get really unsettling. I mean, this expertise, it could be misused, right?
Okay.
To develop things like bioweapons.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. And it's not just theoretical either.
Right.
The UK AI Safety Institute, they've been tracking AI's performance on this benchmark called GPQA. It tests scientific reasoning.
Okay.
And they found that in just a year, AI score went from like 38% to almost 78%.
Whoa.
Almost as good as human experts.
So it's basically gone from AI might be helpful someday to AI understanding this really complex science almost as well as the people who have dedicated their lives to it. And it's all happened like overnight. I mean, it's got to be a wake-up call, right?
Yeah.
It feels like we're at this really crucial turning point.
Absolutely. This pace of progress, it's unlike anything we've seen before.
Yeah.
And the potential for good and bad it's immense. It's why we need to be having these conversations now while we still have time to put some, safeguards in place.
So what can we do? What can we actually do? One solution the source talks about is responsible scaling policies, or RSPs.
Or ISPs.
Yeah, what are those? Can you break it down for us? How do they work?
Sure. So basically, an RSP is a framework for managing the risks that come with AI as it gets, more powerful. The basic idea is that as AI gets smarter, more capable, the safeguards around it also need to be more robust.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like, if you give a toddler a pair of safety scissors, you're not super worried.
Right.
But if you hand them a chainsaw, you're going to need a lot more precautions in place.
Exactly. And the key with an RSP is that it's not a one-time thing. It's this continuous process of evaluating those risks, adjusting the safeguards, and iterating based on what you learn.
And speaking of real-world examples, Anthropic, one of those leading AI companies, they've been using their own RSP for over a year now. So what can we learn from what they've done? Are RSPs enough to really tackle these risks we're talking about?
Well, Anthropic's experience is definitely valuable. They found that having that RSP in place, it's forced them to invest a lot in security and safety evaluations right from the start, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's also made them develop much more detailed threat models and be more transparent about their safety practices. All good things.
Okay.
But are RSPs enough on their own? That's where things get tricky.
Why is that? What's missing?
Well, right now, RSPs are mostly self-regulated. Each company gets to decide how to implement them, what level of rigor to apply. There's no real oversight, from outside to make sure they're actually following these policies effectively or that they're really reducing the risks.
So it sounds like we need more than just, like, voluntary guidelines, right?
Yeah.
We need some external accountability to make sure these safety measures are being taken seriously.
Yeah, that's where the idea of government regulation comes in.
Okay, so regulation. But wait a minute, isn't there a worry that if the government steps in and starts regulating AI, it's going to stifle innovation? This is a field that's moving so fast and, bureaucracy can really slow things down.
It's a valid concern, and we have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
However, the source actually argues that a well-designed regulatory framework could actually speed up AI progress.
How so? That seems kind of like counterintuitive.
Think of it like safety regulations in the aviation industry, for example. Those regulations, they didn't hold back airplanes. In fact, they were critical in making air travel safe enough that everybody could use it.
That's a good point. We don't think of aviation regulations as holding back innovation, right? They're just seen as essential for making sure planes are safe.
Exactly. And in the same way, regulations for AI could actually help build trust in the tech, which could lead to even wider adoption and ultimately even faster progress. It's all about striking the right balance, between innovation and safety.
So what would effective AI regulation actually look like? The source outlines 3 key elements: transparency, incentivizing safety, and simplicity and focus. Let's break those down, starting with transparency. What does that even mean in the world of AI?
Well, in this context, transparency basically means requiring AI companies to publicly disclose their RSPs and the results of their risk evaluations, kind of like a public safety record everyone can see and examine.
So it's kind of like that health inspection score you see posted in a restaurant window?
Yeah.
Lets you know if it's safe to eat there or not.
Exactly. It lets independent experts assess the methods being used and holds companies accountable for their safety claims.
Okay, that makes sense. Transparency builds trust and makes sure everyone is playing by the same rules. Now, what about incentivizing safety? How do we get companies to go above and beyond just the bare minimum, really prioritize it?
Well, there are a few options. One is for the government to define very specific threat models that RSPs have to address. That sets a clear baseline for safety.
So it's not just saying, hey, you need an RSP. It's saying your RSP needs to deal with these very specific, dangerous scenarios.
Right. We could also set standards for what makes a truly robust RSP, rewarding companies that go beyond those standards. Or we could set up systems for sharing best practices and recognizing leaders in AI safety, encouraging this, like race to the top for responsibility.
So a little competition, but in a good way, rewarding the companies that are really prioritizing safety and pushing the whole industry forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, that last element you mentioned, simplicity and focus, why is that so important? Well, look, AI is complicated. Regulations need to be clear, concise, easy to put into practice if we want them to actually work. Overly complex or burdensome regulations could actually backfire and hurt innovation and just create a lot of confusion.
So no 1,000-page rule books filled with jargon that nobody understands. Keep it simple, focused on what really matters.
Exactly. The goal is to create a regulatory environment that's predictable, that encourages responsible development, not one that stifles innovation or gets bogged down in red tape.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned earlier that focusing on regulating general-purpose AI models is more effective than trying to regulate by use case. Can you explain why that is?
Sure. General-purpose AI models are kind of the foundation for all other AI applications. They're like the building blocks. So by regulating those foundational models, you ensure a higher level of safety across the whole AI ecosystem.
Right.
Rather than trying to play whack-a-mole with every single application that pops up.
It's like making sure the foundation of a house is secure, right? Instead of trying to patch up cracks in the walls as they appear. Much more proactive, efficient.
Exactly. And it helps us stay ahead of the game as AI keeps evolving.
Okay. So we've talked about the need for regulation, the key elements of good regulation, and why focusing on those general purpose models is so important. But there's another big question that always comes up, right? What about competition?
Competition, yeah.
If we're the only ones playing by these rules, aren't we going to be at a disadvantage compared to other countries that might be less strict about AI safety?
That's a key question for sure. And it often comes up in these discussions.
Yeah.
Some folks argue that strict regulations are going to stifle innovation and make us less competitive globally. But one of the points made in the source is that a well-designed RSP framework can actually benefit national security and innovation.
How? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, one way is through the protection of intellectual property. The security measures built into RSPs are designed to make it much harder for people, both inside and outside a company, to steal valuable AI tech.
So it's not just about protecting against misuse, it's also about safeguarding our interests and making sure the benefits of AI innovations stay here, not going to our competitors.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because the conversation about AI regulation touches on so many different parts of society: economics, national security, ethics, even philosophy.
Well, this deep dive has been truly eye-opening. I mean, we've covered a ton in a short amount of time, from how fast AI is advancing and the potential for misuse, to the urgent need for regulation and what good policy actually looks like. It's a lot to process, but one thing is clear: we're at a crucial point. The decisions we make in the next 18 months, well, they're going to have a huge impact on the future.
Yeah, it's a call to action for all of us. Policymakers, industry leaders, researchers, and everyday people. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of AI, making sure it's used for good.
Welcome back to our deep dive on AI regulation. So we've established that we need to act fast, but actually figuring out how to create effective policy, that's not easy. It's kind of like, trying to hit a moving target while you're on a roller coaster. Super challenging.
That's a great analogy, and you're right. There's no, magic bullet here. We need to be careful about the potential downsides of any regulations, make sure they don't stifle the, amazing potential of AI.
Speaking of downsides, one of the sources brings up this whole issue of open source AI. What's the deal there? Why is that so tricky to regulate?
Open source AI models are different from the ones that companies like Anthropic develop. They're out there for anyone to access and modify. Anyone can get the code. And that raises some concerns about potential misuse because there's less control over who's using the tech and what they're using it for.
So how do you even start to regulate something that's designed to be open and distributed? It's like herding cats.
Right. It's tough. Well, the source suggests that instead of getting hung up on the development model, whether it's open or closed, we should focus on the actual risks.
Okay.
The idea is that regulation should be applied based on what an AI system can actually do, its capabilities and its potential for harm, regardless of how it was developed.
So if an open source model is shown to pose a real risk, it should have to meet the same safety and security requirements as a closed model that some company made.
Exactly. It's about making sure that all AI development, whether it's happening in a company's lab or, a global community of independent developers, follows the same high standards of safety and responsibility.
Makes sense. Leveling the playing field, making sure everyone's accountable for what they create. Now, let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about the people who are just straight up skeptical of any AI regulation. How do we address those concerns? Bring them into the conversation.
Well, I think clear communication is key. We need to make sure we're using evidence to drive policy decisions. Acknowledge the potential downsides, the possibility of slowing down innovation.
Right.
But present a really strong case for why the benefits, in terms of preventing those really bad outcomes, outweigh the costs.
So having an honest conversation about the trade-offs, right? Presenting the data, showing why regulation is actually necessary. One thing that keeps popping up in these sources is this idea of a surgical approach to regulation. What does that even mean?
It means being very precise, targeted with those regulations, focusing on the biggest risks, the most critical ones, and avoiding unnecessary burdens on developers. Regulations should be specific, easy to understand, straightforward to put into action, not overly broad or complex.
So no 1,000-page rule books, right? So keep it simple, focus on what matters.
The goal is to create an environment that's predictable, that encourages responsible development, not something that stifles innovation or gets bogged down in bureaucracy.
Okay, that makes sense. We've been talking about regulation in a, national context mostly, but AI is global. These risks don't stop at borders. How do we handle regulation on a global scale?
International cooperation is going to be absolutely essential. We have to work together with other countries, establish a shared understanding of the risks, and come up with common standards for safety and security.
But different countries, they have different priorities, right? Different political systems, different levels of, tech development. How do you even get everyone to agree on something as complex as AI regulation?
It won't be easy, that's for sure. But the source suggests that instead of getting bogged down in ideology, we should focus on empirically measured risks. The stuff we can actually measure.
Okay.
If we can all agree on a set of objective criteria for evaluating those risks, it becomes easier to develop regulations that everyone can support, no matter their political or cultural background.
So finding common ground based on the data, the evidence, right? Not getting stuck in political debates or philosophical differences.
It's about being pragmatic, using data and scientific research to guide decisions.
This deep dive has really shown the tightrope we're walking with AI. We want to encourage innovation. We want to use it to make our lives better. But we also need to be super careful about the risks, put those safeguards in place to prevent the unintended consequences.
It's the classic dilemma, move fast and break things versus look before you leap. And with AI, the stakes are huge. The choices we make now will have consequences for generations to come.
Okay, so we've explored the need for regulation, the challenges of implementing it, the importance of international cooperation. But there's another crucial piece we haven't really talked about. The role of just, regular people,
Yeah.
Public awareness, education. What can everyday people do to help shape this?
That's such an important point. This isn't just about policymakers figuring it out on their own. The public needs to understand the potential benefits and risks of AI. It needs to be part of the discussion about responsible regulation.
So it's not just experts and lawmakers talking to each other. We need a broader conversation about the future of AI and how it impacts our lives.
Absolutely. We need to demystify AI. Explain how it could impact things like healthcare, education, finance, you name it. Address public concerns openly and honestly. Transparency and open dialogue are key for building trust and ensuring that AI is developed and used in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
So it's about giving people the tools to be informed participants in the AI revolution, not just passive bystanders who are along for the ride.
Exactly. That means making complex technical information easy to understand, creating opportunities for people to share their thoughts and give feedback, making sure that diverse voices are heard when policies are being made. We need everyone at the table if we want to get this right.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, but the potential payoff is enormous. If we do this right, we can unlock the incredible benefits of AI while protecting ourselves from the dangers.
That's what we're aiming for. And this deep dive has given us a good foundation for understanding the challenges and the opportunities. Now, in part 3 of this deep dive, we'll shift our focus to the long term. We'll explore what could happen if we do regulate AI and what could happen if we don't. We'll paint a picture of what the future might hold and get into the ethical implications of the choices we're making today.
It's a fascinating and crucial conversation. We hope you'll join us for the final part of our deep dive into the urgent need for AI regulation.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. The urgent need for AI regulation.
We've covered a lot. I mean, the rapid advancements in AI, the risks, global cooperation. We've even talked about transparency, getting the public involved, and that balance, between innovation and safety.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. So let's shift gears now, look to the future. What could happen down the line based on the choices we make today about regulating AI? What are the consequences, good or bad, that we're looking at? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The decisions we make, like right now in the next 18 months, they'll have a big impact, a lasting one, on society. They'll shape AI for, decades to come.
So let's start positive. What's the best case scenario? We implement a really strong, effective system for regulating AI. What does that world look like? What happens?
The ideal outcome. We create an environment where AI can really flourish, but responsibly, leading to those big breakthroughs in, tons of fields. Science, medicine, you name it. Imagine a world where AI is helping us cure diseases, fight climate change, solve those massive problems we've been struggling with.
Now that's a future I can get behind. AI-powered medicine, better renewable energy, even solutions to hunger and poverty. Things that seemed impossible before.
And it's not just about fixing what's broken, right? AI could open up entirely new possibilities, new industries, new ways of life that right now we can't even picture. Think about how the internet changed communication or commerce, entertainment. AI has that kind of potential. It could be even bigger.
Yeah, it's like the printing press or electricity. Those were turning points, right?
Huge changes for society.
Exactly. And AI could be that big, kicking off a whole new era of progress.
And just like with those earlier inventions, the impact of AI really comes down to how we choose to use it. If we prioritize ethical development, transparency, if we really focus on what's best for people, AI could unlock human potential like we've never seen before.
But of course, there's the other side of the coin. What if we don't regulate AI effectively? What's the worst case scenario? What risks are we talking about?
Yeah, that's when things get a bit, dystopian. We could see AI used for bad stuff. making existing inequalities even worse, creating new ways to control people. The source talks about the risks of AI being used for, like, really advanced cyber attacks or to make autonomous weapons, killer robots, basically. Imagine if those threats became, just normal.
Man, that's scary. More cybercrime, less privacy, maybe even AI-powered wars with machines making life or death decisions without any humans involved.
Right, and it's not even just intentional misuse that we got to worry about.
Yeah.
What if these AI systems, they start acting in ways we didn't expect,
Yeah.
causing harm, even though they weren't programmed to do that?
Yeah.
The more complex they get. We need to invest in AI safety research, get academia, industry, and government all working together. And we have to be willing to change our regulations as needed. This landscape is changing so fast, we got to be flexible, responsive.
And that brings us back to, regular people, public awareness, education. We can't leave all this to the experts, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
We need an informed public that's part of this conversation about AI. People need the knowledge, the critical thinking skills to understand this fast-changing world and make good choices about the future they want.
So it's about giving people the power to be active participants, not just sitting on the sidelines watching it happen.
Right. We need to make all this complex information about AI understandable. We need to create opportunities for dialogue, feedback. We need to make sure everyone's voice is heard when we're making these policies. If we want to do this right, everybody has to be involved.
It's a huge undertaking, but the potential benefits, well, they're massive. If we get this right, we can use AI to solve some of our biggest problems.
And make a better future for everyone.
Exactly. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they actually do to make a difference?
First things first, stay informed. Learn about AI. The good, the bad, the potential. Get involved in discussions about its development, how we regulate it. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions. Demand transparency from the people who are building and using these AI systems.
And don't just talk about it, do something. Support the organizations that are promoting responsible AI, advocate for policies that prioritize safety, ethics, human well-being.
Remember, the future isn't set in stone. We get to decide what it looks like with AI. It's shaped by our choices, our actions. Let's make sure it's a future where AI is a tool that helps us, not one that puts us at risk.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the urgent need for AI regulation. Hope you found it informative, got you thinking, maybe even sparked some inspiration.
Thanks for listening. Keep learning about this. It's important. The future of AI, well, it's in our hands. Let's be smart about it.
And until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.